Hello there, world history people. This is going to be one of my favorite lessons. I'm going to teach you all about nuclear power. Mr. Brown, I'll say this. I have some bias. I think nuclear power is very good. Nuclear power is a low carbon emission, high electricity generating system. So first, let me describe how nuclear power works. So, what you need are atomic fuel rods. You can make them out of uranium and some other really highly radioactive rare substances. You take these rods, you put them in a special containment system, usually that's covered in water, and then you get heating coils under the rods, and you start to heat up the rods. Now, when you heat up uranium, it gets really radioactive, and it also gets really hot. And as these rods get hotter and hotter, all of this water in the nuclear reactor will turn into steam. You then put the steam through a turbine. The turbine moves around into a generator. The generator produces electricity, and you can provide electricity for millions and millions of people. Okay? It's all pretty great. But nuclear power is very dangerous. And the reason why it's dangerous is because as you heat up uranium, you never want it to get too hot, and you also never want all this water to evaporate. Because as this water is evaporating around the control rods, it's great. It's creating steam, it's moving the turbines. But if ever this runs out of water, then the reaction will continue to get hotter and hotter and hotter. The control rods will melt, and the radiation will get out of control. Now, every nuclear reactor does have a big containment structure built around it. All of the reactors in the United States actually have 3 containment structures built around them to just super make sure that radiation never leaks out of the dang thing. But the reactor I'm going to talk about today only had 1 containment structure. And that containment structure is going to crack, and everything's going to get out of control really, really bad. So, that's the basics of how nuclear power works. Hope that you kind of learned something there. And the short part is, never let the rods get too hot and never run out of water. The other thing too is you could alternatively just cool down the rods. Just stop making these stop making the uranium pellets too hot, and then the reaction will just cease down into nothing, and it'll be a minimal amount of radiation. So there are a lot of ways to stop a nuclear reaction, but as I'll teach you today, it didn't happen. Okay? All right. Now here's some more stuff to know. Nuclear reactors. Today, there are 425 nuclear reactors in 31 different countries around the world. Surprisingly, the country of France gets like 85% of its power from nuclear reactors. So, all right, and I think I've already told you all this about how a nuclear reactor works. All right, let's check it out. So, this nuclear reactor there, this is it powered down. And I'm really going to reference The Simpsons a lot in this lesson. So, Homer Simpson is a nuclear power engineer at the Springfield power plant. If you've ever watched the cartoon The Simpsons, you know Homer Simpson is an idiot. And here he is in the opening sequence handling an active uranium rod. So clearly it's highly radioactive, and he shouldn't be hanging out with his buddy Lenny like that. And here's where you'll find nuclear reactors around the country. So there is one relatively close to Las Vegas, right here with our border with California. All right. Now, in the 1980s, the USSR was building many new communities that utilized atomic energy. I mean, it was cheap, it was generally provided a lot of energy, and as long as a nuclear reactor is managed properly, it works fine. So one of these communities was the city of Pripyat, with a population of 50,000 people, and it was located near the Chernobyl power plant. Here are some pictures of Pripyat. And Pripyat is definitely very reminiscent of the American town of Springfield, okay? So here's some Soviet people loving life in Pripyat. Here's a bunch of kids singing outside. There's this famous Ferris wheel. Here's people hanging out with a picture of Lenin. And then, so yeah, it's sort of like a happy family in Pripyat, but guess what? There's a nuclear reactor in the background that's probably going to be spewing some stuff into the atmosphere. All right. And so on April 26th, 1986, this is something I have to make very clear to you kids. There was nothing wrong with the nuclear reactor. Okay, other than its design of only having one containment structure, the reactor was working fine. It was working as intended, nothing wrong. The engineers in the control booth decided that they were going to run a test. They said, okay, first, let's get the rods really, really, really hot and see what happens. Let's also cut off the water and see what happens. It was really stupid and really dumb. But a lot of the guys who were in this control panel, none of them were nuclear engineers with PhDs. A lot of these guys had personal connections, like their dad was high up in the Communist Party and was like, I want my son to be a nuclear engineer and live in the fancy new town of Pripyat. Your son needs an education. I'm the party secretary. I can decide what to do. All right, fine. He's in charge of the reactor. So these guys, like, they really didn't know what they were doing, okay? And they failed their test. They could have turned the rods off, cooled them down really fast. They could have flooded the reaction with water, but they made all the wrong choices, okay? And this is covered really well in the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. I highly recommend you watch it. But what ultimately happened was the reaction got out of control. The rods got way too hot. The containment field exploded, and the uranium pellets started melting into each other, and they started leaking unbelievable amounts of radiation out of this reactor. Every single person who was in this room during the reaction will eventually die from cancer, because that's what radiation does. Gives you fast-acting cancer and all kinds of terrible, terrible effects on living creatures. So this is what that reactor room looked like before the disaster, and this is kind of the cartoon version of it. You know, the reactor's on fire, and the guys at the control panel are literally doing nothing. Okay, so they pressed the wrong buttons, caused an air leak, unbelievable amounts of fallout and radiation leaking everywhere. Over the next 24 hours, thousands of soldiers and firefighters scrambled to contain this leak. But the Soviet Union really didn't want the world to know how bad it was, so they actually sent in a lot of these firefighters and soldiers without proper protective equipment. And a lot of these guys started getting sick. They're like, what's wrong with us? I thought this is just a fire, but this is way worse, I guess. And so thousands of these guys, like 31 people initially died, but then thousands of more guys will die from various effects of radiation. It's estimated that 93,000 people died from this disaster. Okay, and the sad thing is the melted uranium pellets look like this. Look at how like they took a picture and the camera got messed up, and you see like outlines of human bodies because the radiation affected the camera lens. But this is called the elephant's foot, and it is still technically on fire today, and it's giving off 8,000 rads of radiation per second today in the year 2010. I think I read somewhere that it's so hot and so radioactive, it will continue melting through the structure of Chernobyl until it eventually reaches the core of the Earth. I was like, wow. And it'll get there in like 10,000 years. So this is literally an environmental disaster of a portion that we don't even have the science to solve. Like, the mistake those Soviet reactor or those Soviet nuclear operators made in 1980 is still a problem affecting our world today. And so much of that radiation leaked out of, today the radiation is controlled, thank God. We built a huge containment field over it. But I actually read a recent article, this had to be within the last 2 years, that the radiation dome above this reactor in Chernobyl is now starting to show cracks. So it's like, oh no, we're going to have to build another containment zone over this thing because it's just so bad. Okay, so here's some firefighters trying to solve the problem there. Here's a monument to all the firefighters who died. Here's a guy looking at what was once a nuclear reactor and it's now a melted mess. Here's an aerial shot of it. And then, yeah, the firefighters tried to beat down the flames. They kicked at the graphite with their feet. The doctors kept telling them they'd been poisoned by gas, but they were poisoned by radiation. And I showed you that picture. And then here's where the radiation got really bad. So radiation will travel with the wind, and then it'll kind of eventually settle in certain areas. And so the Chernobyl plant was here near the city of Pripyat, but it did go into parts of Belarus and Russia. And this radiation cloud actually traveled to even parts of Europe as well. So if you ever go to Europe, beware, especially if you go to this part of Russia. And I know that all these zones in the red right here, especially the city of Pripyat, it's been declared off limits of human habitation for the next 10,000 years. So, really bad mistake. Okay? Real bad mistake. All right, yeah, here we go. 500,000 people were exposed to damaging radiation. The surrounding 30-kilometer area is permanently evacuated, and the Soviet Union spent millions of dollars turning that destroyed reactor into a 5,000-ton sarcophagus. That's what it looks like. And I told you there's already cracks forming in it. So let's check out some of these pictures here. So this is what Pripyat looks like today, a bunch of abandoned buildings. And here's just a bunch of gas masks that got used during the disaster. Here's that nuclear symbol. Here's the one of those control panels. And there they have a sarcophagus over it. And this is what it looks like under the sarcophagus. So it's this melted reactor. And here's the radiation leaking, the melted uranium rods leaking back into the earth. And there's that Ferris wheel. It's all abandoned. Okay, so Chernobyl's effects on people. Some of these pictures are hard to see. So be warned, kids. So cancer rates in children increased 90% in the late 1980s and early 1990s. That tells you something about what happened here. So yeah, incidence of cancer in Belarus, it's going way, way, way up. Here's a kid born without arms. Here's some kids who have some serious genetic defects. Probably they were exposed to radiation as babies. That's really, really bad. Yeah, you see what's happened to that Russian kid right there. This kid born with a messed up lip. This girl born with messed up eyes. And yeah, so here's where the radiation got real bad. I already showed you a map of this part, but then random parts actually went to like southern Germany and Austria, and then yeah, just kind of traveled the wind to Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And yeah, 2,000 people dead. The nuclear nightmare is here. Yeah, and Chernobyl's effects on animals. It also affects animals too. So let's look at some of this stuff here. This is a baby bunny born without ears. See that in the top corner? Here's a deer that was born with 6 legs. Here's a 2-headed cow. Here's 3 toads that are kind of also one toad. That's really weird. Here's a wolf with 3 tails. That's actually kind of cool. All right, I'm not gonna dispute that one. And then here's a sheep that also is born with a ridiculous amount of legs. Okay, but before I actually move on to the next topic, I will say that as long as you put smart people in charge of nuclear reactors, and you have a lot of safety protocols, and you have these like automatic kill switches, like if the reaction gets too hot, you don't even make it a human error. You like have some automated process where it just floods the whole reactor and it stops producing power. That's the way you can safely use nuclear power. Okay, like it didn't have to be like this. It was terrible, terrible, terrible human error. So please don't get too freaked out of this lesson and think nuclear power is so bad. It is dangerous, but when used in the proper hands, I advocate for nuclear power, absolutely. All right, moving on. Okay, so I'm also going to talk about the topic of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan today. This has some really lasting effects on America's military policy, even in the year 2021. So, in 1979, a revolution occurred in the country of Afghanistan, and a new government wanted to pursue super socialism. And the Soviet Union's like, what up? We like you. We're going to help. So the USSR sent in some ambassadors and sent this new revolution money and was like, Afghanistan, we're going to make you super socialist. We're going to let you join the communism team, maybe even join the USSR properly. So the Soviet Union was all about it. All right. So here's what Afghanistan looks like. It's a bunch of high mountains and valleys. And there's Afghanistan. And all this used to be the Soviet Union. So they actually bordered the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was all about it. Okay. A part of this new socialism was to shift the country away from Islam. The Soviet Union was anti-religion, and many people in Afghanistan are hardcore Muslims. So a lot of the people, especially not living in the cities, disagreed with this new socialism government, and so they started to fight against it, and Afghanistan had kind of this mini civil war. Well, the new socialist government in Afghanistan asked the Soviet army for help to put down these hardcore Muslims. So the Soviet Union responded in full, and the Soviet Union sent in their entire military to support this pro-Soviet government and to put down these Muslim fighters who were fighting against communism. And in so many ways, this war is completely comparable to the American experience in Vietnam. Because in Vietnam, the United States sent in our military to help support the capitalist government against these kind of communist revolutionaries, and now here's the Soviet government sending in their military to support a socialist government fighting against, well, this isn't capitalist resistors, but these are Muslim resistors. So in a way, the war is kind of different because it was a battle of communism versus Islamic fundamentalism, rather than the Soviet Union. That one was, in Vietnam, it was surely capitalism versus communism. All right, but very comparable nonetheless. Okay, so here's the Soviet Union killing the dove of peace, and here's a Muslim guy being like, "Get away from our country, you evil Soviets." And then here's the sword of Allah striking a communist tank. And here's what you would see in that war, a whole bunch of Soviet helicopters dropping guys on mountains to fight against the Muslim insurrectionists. Okay, so the USA was so happy that the Soviet Union was now engaged trying to suppress a violent uprising. I mean, we learned a lot of hard lessons from Vietnam and said, the United States is never going to do that again. And then when we watched the Soviet military invade Afghanistan, we're like, here's our chance. So the United States contacted a lot of these fighters in Afghanistan and said, hey, we want you guys to keep fighting the Soviets. What do you need? Do you need missile launchers? Have some American-made missile launchers. Do you need some M16 assault rifles? Have some American-made assault rifles. Whatever you guys need, we'll give you everything you want. Okay? And so we also gave them military training. We told them how to make bombs. We told them how to blow stuff up. And we were thrilled that they were fighting the Soviet Union. And this group of Muslim fighters fighting the Soviets were called the Mujahideen, and America was all about these guys. So let's check it out. So America's great game, our involvement in Afghanistan, giving them guns. This guy's eating some Hershey peanut bars, and he's loving it. Using missiles to shoot down Soviet helicopters. And here's these Soviet helicopters. Look, I'm kind of a military guy, and I'll tell you, the Soviet Hind helicopter has to be one of the coolest pieces of military equipment I've ever seen. It's a heavy attack helicopter that was, by all accounts, just an incredible weapon of war. But the United States gave the Mujahideen these missile launchers. They locked on to the helicopters, and they just tore these Soviet copters right down. And yeah, so here's the Mujahideen fighting back. All right, and the Mujahideen started actually recruiting young Muslims from all over the world to fight against these godless communists. And one of these young Mujahideen was an heir to a really rich family in Saudi Arabia named Osama bin Laden. He would later go on to found the anti-American terrorist group Al-Qaeda, but at this point in history, Osama bin Laden actually got training from the United States' CIA operatives about how to build bombs, about how to blow up airplanes, about how to do a bunch of really nasty stuff that he's ultimately going to use against the United States 30 years later. So rude, first of all. But yes, the United States created and trained many of the people who will later turn against us during the time of terrorism after the Cold War. All right, so here's Osama bin Laden with a lot of his family members in the 70s, and Osama was wearing this green shirt with bright purple pants. So there's young Osama in the 70s. But then he gets converted into radical Islam. Here he is wearing an American jacket that was gifted to him. And here he is using an American radio to fight the Soviet Union. All right, and so for 10 years, the Soviet army rained havoc across Afghanistan, tried to defeat the Muslim fighters, but eventually the Soviet Union lost. Okay, they spent millions of dollars in this failed war, and the Soviet military was totally expended, and they didn't get anything out of this war, so they really were so defeated, and that's going to be the context leading into my final video in this unit. All right, but first, let's check out some of these pictures here. So here's President Ronald Reagan inviting members of the Mujahideen into the White House and being like, hey guys, you're doing a great job fighting the Soviet Union. Keep it up. You want some more guns? You want some more money? Whatever you guys need. And then, 20 years later, they try to blow up the White House. So choose your friends wisely, kids. And here's what Afghanistan, there's still remains from this war even today. Here's a lot of these fighters taking some of their found Russian guns. And then I think this news article just holds up so terribly in the modern world. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. And it talks about Osama bin Laden. Little did they know, this guy would launch a terrorist attack against the United States and kill 5,000 Americans on September 11th. Oh, gosh. All right, and that's where I'll end it here. See you in the last video. Peace out.